Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome to Resiliency Matters. What if you could learn from a man who grappled with reconciling two very different missions, to heal and to kill? Would you spend the next 28 minutes with us? What if in the next 10 minutes you could receive a powerful reminder about the importance of following your dreams? Would you hang out with us? Who is us? My other half today is Dr. Jon Kerstetter, retired U.S. Army flight surgeon and author of a riveting memoir called Crossings, a doctor soldier's story. In this book, Jon recounts many of the crossings of his life, including through poverty, through medical school, from civilian to serving 3 tours in Iraq, through post-traumatic stress disorder, and from doctor to patient after a life-altering stroke. So much to talk about today. Welcome, Jon.
Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so let's start at the very beginning, as they say. You grew up on a tribal reservation in Wisconsin.
Yes.
How did that shape you?
Well, the Oneida Indian Reservation is right next to Green Bay. And in the earliest years, I was there from age 0 to 5, and then back in the 6th grade for a year. I think the biggest shaping momentum was watching my mother deal with poverty and deal with this question of survival. And I got to see her. I got to see her work. I got to see her strive. I got to see her do the things that single moms do every single day with 3 kids. She'd farm. She had a little garden plot. She'd work that every day. We didn't have much to eat, but what we had, she prayed over it. She made toys out of oxtail soup bones that we had. And watching that, watching her struggle, cemented in me at a very early age this idea that you've got to work, you've got to survive. She decided when I was 5 years old to leave the reservation. She had no friends, no acquaintances, went to work at a Bureau of Indian Affairs school in Utah. And again, I got to see her in this survival mode. She had a 6th grade education, was a domestic, worked at a school in the school cafeteria in the Bureau of Indian Affairs school. And I saw her struggle every day, but I also saw this thing every day, and I think it's a thing called hope and resilience. There was a big, huge garden area. It was all weeds. It was about a city block full of weeds behind a gas station. She rented the back part of a gas station that had a house in it. And she'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. She'd be out there pulling weeds, throwing rocks, cultivating, doing whatever she had to do to make that garden grow. And I watched that every summer for several years. I watched her toil at work. And those early lessons told me that it wasn't necessarily a matter of what color you were, but it was a matter of what you had in your heart and how you decided you were going to survive. So those were the very early formative things I saw from my culture and my mom.
Powerful.
Yeah.
And then when you were 5 years old, you had a driving interest in science, but you also experienced an illness and were shaped by another hand, a doctor.
The same gas station house we were in the first year and a half we were there, right in the middle of winter, I developed diphtheria. And for people who don't know what that is, it's almost like a super bad strep throat. Throat swells, you get high fevers, closes you down, you can't breathe. Well, an old country doctor comes to our house, makes house calls, and he listens, he taps my throat, he taps my back, looks at me, and gives me a big old shot of penicillin right in the buttock. And I go, wow, that's amazing. Here's a man, it's kind of a mysterious fella, big tall guy, big hands. He has this big black bag and he opens it up and there's all these tools and things and medicine in there. And I, for whatever reason, you oftentimes as kids you don't know why you get interested in something, but something happened with the magic of healing, the magic of his soothing voice and his demeanor told me that's what I want to be. I got to have some part of this thing called medicine. I fell in love with it. I didn't know what it was completely, but then I pursued it through high school. And the more I went, the more I read about it, I said, that's what I've got to be. I've got to be a doctor.
And you say that for Native populations especially, that education is so essential. You were discouraged from studying medicine,
Yeah.
and found your
Well,
way into business school.
Sure, if we look at the kind of educational arc that I took, my mom went to the 6th grade, was raised in a mission boarding school. And she'd always grab me by the shirt and lapels when I was in high school and shake me and say, "You've got to get an education. Johnny, you've got to get an education." "Yes, Mom." "Well, I want to be a doctor." "Well, I didn't mean that, but what I meant was you've got to get some kind of education." Now, for her, that meant going to the Army. Well, I pursued. I got to college. And my first week, I check a box says, I'm going to be a pre-med major. And all the pre-med students met with the advisor, and he stood up and he said, "None of you will ever see the inside of a medical school." I was floored. And then he called people in individually, and he said to me, "Now, you're American Indian, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "We have an advisor, and I'm going to send you over there," which he did. Met with the advisor, and he said this very interesting thing. He said, "I agree with the chemistry prof. We'll probably never see the inside of a medical school because we, Indians, don't do the hard sciences." Blew me away. He said, "We do social work and education." Now that was his paradigm. Now this was a native advisor with a master's degree in social work. But he had been taught something very restrictive. That is, we live in a box. I wanted to get out of the box. I wanted to get off the reservation, so to say. Well, I didn't have enough strength. I didn't have study skills to the degree that I could overcome that. So I believed him. It kind of became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Flunked out of school in terms of the pre-med degree, and I ended up in business.
And then you had a business professor who...
Later on in graduate school in business, I had a professor, and I was interested in science, and he said one day, "You really ought to think about becoming a doctor because you are interested in it, and that's your real dream." I said, "Yeah, I vaguely remember thinking about that along the way somewhere." Now that's all it took. So the contrast between the two was one said, "No, you can't," and the other said, "You should do this." Very different, and that's what I did.
How I love that story because I sing from the top of my lungs about trusted adults in our work in resilience building. So there is your first takeaway, that your dreams are important. Never let other people discourage them. Learning how to manage traumatic stress. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome back to Resiliency Matters. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Jon Kerstetter. We've talked about your beginnings, John, and then you did become that doctor at age 37, did international humanitarian work, Kosovo, Rwanda, and after a career in emergency medicine, you still were searching for more, and then 9/11 happened, and you found your way to the U.S. Army. Tell us about that.
One of the things that transpires as an emergency medicine specialist is you do a lot of critical medicine, and it's very important, but you also do a lot of primary care medicine, and it kind of gets in the craw of emergency medicine doctors. As a kid, I always sought adventure. I always sought to explore and kind of be on the leading edge of things. About the time I was feeling that I wasn't all that important in emergency medicine and the civilian aspect, the military was recruiting doctors. And I thought, this might be something for me. And in fact, I did join the Iowa National Guard. And there were two things. Yes, one, the adventure played a large part of it, but the other part was I tended to view my life as a physician with certain responsibilities. In other words, there's soldiers that needed doctors desperately, and I was that physician, and I had a critical skill set, and I decided, much the same as I did in international medicine, I need to go. And it was more almost on that basis that I had a personal responsibility to respond to a need that I decided, and I became a soldier and trained as a Iowa National Guard's guardsman, and I was deployed in the Iraq War in 2003.
And you write about all of these crossings in this book, and you refer to one as an unholy crossing, but you talk about the crossing that many soldiers go through. from that starting place of wanting to help and serve and bring that hope and protect our country to that place of where hatred starts to seep into your soul. What happened with that?
It's tough to go to war. I deployed 3 times, but in the first tour, very difficult. I was in Baghdad, and about the middle of the summer, we had an occasion called the Canal Hotel bombing, and I was intimately involved in the recovery of a lot of the soldiers, and actually had identified a lot of the dead bodies. There were a lot of civilians killed in that incident, and it hit me that war wasn't just something that soldiers did, one to another, one professional to another. We knew what we were getting into, and we signed on for that, and we went, and that was our profession. Yet mothers and daughters, old men, civilians didn't sign up for that. And I had an event where it turned me internally, almost my internal ethic, my compass for ethics turned, and instead of thinking of the enemy as purely an enemy, as a professional enemy, I thought of them as a form of evil. So I began to hate my enemy. And the more I talked to other soldiers, the more I realized that that's a pretty common occurrence. So war is not something that a doctor or a soldier can just go to and survive the experience. It's something you live internally, and somewhere in there, it seems like every soldier has that turning event where all of a sudden you're dealing with emotions of hate. And it's a very difficult thing to understand, to wake up one day and realize that I can be a hateful person, and hate can be a tool that I can use.
And then when you came back, you were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. For that and all the turnings you had and crossings you had, you experienced so much in your 3 tours. And I want to do 2 things with this question. One, I want to do a little psychoeducation for our audience, and we're going to put up the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's experiencing a traumatic event and having recurrent memories, nightmares, avoidance, and then changes in mood or thinking. And you would be working with therapists, and they would be sharing the criteria for PTSD, and you would say, I don't need you to give me this criteria, I'm living it.
Yeah.
And so talk to us about that shift in mindset that allowed you to start to come back and to find your way through the trauma.
Initially, when I came back, I was living in the kind of soldier mindset that PTSD is a sign of weakness, and you're a soldier, therefore you're tough. And you don't have this. It was a total state of denial. Now, having said that, I couldn't explain why I had to have certain emotions, certain feelings, certain startle responses at things, certain reactions. If my wife turned a certain way in bed or got tangled up in the sheets, I would strike out and actually hit her. And you go, where'd that come from? So I had to reconcile this business that I feel these things, and I knew what the criteria was. I'm a professional, I knew what they were, against a kind of a mantra that said, no, I'm a tough guy. And I shunned the therapist, and I said, no, you weren't there, you weren't at war, I know more than you do. But eventually I had to say, wait a minute, if you're gonna heal, you have to trust. And little by little, I said, it's true they weren't at war, but they're there trying to help me just like I was trying to help a soldier. And in that recognition, I finally decided that I needed to turn, I needed to trust and build and let a little bridge building go on. And when I did that, when I said that I'm a wounded soldier, when I finally admitted it, that's what kind of broke the ice and let them come in and be part of my therapy team.
And this book is just a fascinating unfolding of you giving yourself permission to heal in those ways. And one story that really struck with me, because I've seen this again and again, is your conversation with Ray, a Vietnam vet. You weren't looking for this conversation.
Right.
And it was when your therapist was pushing you a bit on and talking about your nightmares, on if you had ever hurt yourself or your wife.
Sure.
And at that time you thought, nope, I'm not going there, and you don't deserve to hear. And then at coffee with Ray, what happened?
So Ray's a Vietnam vet, and he knew I was going to the VA for therapy, and he said, so are they getting in your head? I said, no, they're not. And he said, well, this is what happened to me. When I came home, I'm surprised I didn't kill my wife, because he would hurt her, he'd beat her, in the middle of a thrashing nightmare. I said, oh, I got some of those same things that happened to me. And he was just talking as a friend, as a fellow soldier, and almost casually. And he said, well, there's two things you need to know about that. One, it's real. And two, it eventually goes away, but you have to address it. I go, oh, okay. Now, Ray was a medic. He was a Vietnam medic. Now, he didn't know he was playing therapist right during that coffee period, but he was. And what it pointed out to me was often that it's not necessarily the person with the degree behind their name that comes to your aid, that you put your trust in. It might be a friend, it might be a parent, it might be a spouse. But the point is, you need to say, they're right, and you recognize it. And then that kind of served as the nidus to push me further into therapy and say, you know what? It's true. I do have it, and I need your help. And again, as soon as I crossed that bridge and allowing them to come in, then we really started making progress.
And again, that's so powerful. I've seen it in context from credit card debt to addictions to our work with veterans to all these different scenarios, that when someone can just speak and you can see that those dark secrets that you thought you had to hold on so tightly to, and they're saying it without shame. They're saying it, and it's just such a pourful invitation to healing.
It almost freed me to say I wasn't the only one with this. Other people have it too.
Exactly. And I hope that viewers, you are here today and that you can see yourself in some of Jon's story. No matter what you have experienced, there is someone who can help. The key is to understand that you are not alone and you need to take the first step toward healing. That moment when life will never be the same again. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome back to Resiliency Matters, talking with Jon Kerstetter today. And I tell you, Jon, I get toward the end of your book, and you say something like, my life's lessons, the story, really boils down to one word: resilience, personal resilience.
Yeah, it does.
and I thought, no wonder I love this book so much. But you write about these crossings and really leaving a legacy of resilience. And so I'm asking if you'd read a paragraph or two from your book about that legacy.
I'll read about what I've learned. What have I learned about the forces that have shaped me and the boundaries that try to define me? In all my years of medical and military training, one thing has become apparent. I cherished learning and exploring, perhaps above all other human endeavors. When I was young, I always ventured near the edges of things. I was adventurous. I had an inquisitive mind and spirit. I never tolerated boredom or stagnation. I constantly moved forward while pushing boundaries, and learning was something I could always do. During the first year of my stroke, I thought even that had come to an end, but I was wrong. And the lessons I learned over the years of therapy have given me the greatest insight as to who I am. I'm more than the sum of limits and forces, more than the accretion of things I've gained or lost, and certainly far more than the dust of failures and triumphs. I am that human complexity of soul and mind and body that holds the innate ability to preserve my life by making conscious decisions to change my life. I am that person who, by the force of loss, has had to learn the force of resilience. That has not been easy. At times I was defeated and adrift, but I learned to keep pushing hard against the boundaries that emerged, the real and the imagined, and I crossed them wherever I could, and I reassessed them where I could not.
So in there you mentioned the stroke, which was intertwined really with your PTSD treatment. Tell us how you finished your third tour and you planned to go back for a fourth, and your service ended abruptly. What happened?
It did. During the course of my medical evaluations, I was found to have an aneurysm in my brain. And I had surgery. I had endovascular surgery, and air bubbles got in my brain and caused a stroke. When I woke up, I was a different person. And in the following days and weeks, I didn't know who I was. I lost my ability to do medicine. I couldn't read. I was taken all the way back down to the 3rd grade level of reading. Couldn't understand people. I couldn't think fast. I couldn't think like a doctor. So I lost my identity as a soldier and a doctor. Really as a person, I didn't know who I was. I became a patient, the opposite of being a doctor. So everything was gone. And that threw me for a loss, a huge, huge loss. I didn't know how to recover, didn't know what to do, and I was totally in the hands of my therapists. So in that, in the waning first days of stroke, the first thing was to work on the physical aspects of rehabilitation only. We weren't thinking about careers, we weren't thinking about writing books, we were saying it was that question my mom asked in the Indian reservation, what can we do to survive? And at that stage, survival meant got to learn rereading, rewalking, we have to go to therapy, we have to be an inpatient for a long time, and I have to trust other doctors.
And then you continued to go and exceed expectations and move through plateaus. You really did that, I think, by forming a new mission, and your recovery became your new mission. Is that accurate?
That's exactly right. So kind of one of the Army paradigms is do the mission. Well, what is the mission? Well, now I had a new mission, recovery. And it wasn't clear I was to recover to what. When I came back from home, all soldiers had this thing called a transition brief. We're going to transition back to what you left. But I couldn't transition back because I wasn't going to be a doctor anymore. Stroke has taken all that. So what I found was that it wasn't a transition, it was a transformation into something else, something different, something that was undefined. And that was tricky. So I'd work with therapists all the time and begin redefining who it is I was going to be. Now, here's an interesting thing. When I was a first-year medical student on the neurology service, I was told that at 1 year, whatever you have from a stroke, that's what you have. You're not going to gain any more recovery. I was told that the first year of my stroke, 12 years ago now. The Army doctors told me that when I went for my Army evaluation for my discharge. They said, you're not going to use your arm ever again. You're not going to be able to think like a doctor or a soldier ever again. We thank you for your service. You're now discharged. So I had to overcome, first of all, saying, well, wait a minute, I don't understand this medical paradigm that says at 1 year, here's what I have. No, I didn't have a whole lot at 1 year. But there was something in me that said, keep fighting, keep moving, redefine the mission. We did, I did, my family did, my wife did. So the mission was more about me. It was all inclusive, almost like a community. And fortunately, I had a therapist at the VA who said that you can do more. We know you can do more. So we just redefined it. We redefined the first year plateau. And we hit it and we improved, and that gave us enough hope to say, there's another plateau somewhere. And at year 2, we hit that plateau and we went further. And then about every 6 months, we hit a new clinical plateau. And I've been doing that for 10 to 12 years now.
So you continue. You've hit so many key pieces of resilience. But what would you say, whether to a young warrior who's coming back and transitioning? I know you take issue with that because you can't come back to what was. But what have you learned about personal resilience?
Here's probably the key thing, is that number one, you're not alone. Number two, it takes hard work. No one's going to give you your recovery in a basket. It just doesn't come that way. It's not in a pill. You have to do the work of recovery, and you do it with a team. You do it with a team of therapists, you do it with your family, you do it with your faith, you do it with your inner strength, you do it with the lessons your mom and father gave you. You do it with everything you've learned, and you can't give up. You have to do it every single day. So I'm still in therapy. I still go to therapy. I still do it, and I do it every day, and I'm still recovering.
You're recovering and you are inspiring, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts to be sharing your story and your lessons. So there is Jon's third tool. Do not accept limitations or plateaus as permanent. With ongoing support and effort, high levels of recovery are possible. Thank you, Dr. Jon Kerstetter, and thank you, viewers, for joining us on Resiliency Matters on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.